Okay, folks, we're going to go ahead and get started. First of all, I'm glad all of you are here to do our first live session. What we're going to start by doing is actually jumping into some breakout rooms where you'll be with a small group of students. And what I'd like you to do is just talk about that free writing that you did on that question. How should a person read a poem? So I'm going to go ahead and get you in those breakout rooms. And give me just a second. Once you're there, go ahead and talk about that question. Here we go. Okay, folks, it looks like I made a mistake. I'm hoping that you all can hear me right now, but I'm going to unmute you and then put you back in the breakout room so you can actually hopefully talk to each other about it. So here we go.
It was a mistake. No one wanted to talk.
Lo mío.
Yo necesito esto. Oh.
Dump.
But yeah, other than that, I don't really know. I just say it has to be like said, read a certain way out loud.
Yeah, like
All right, folks, as we return from those breakout rooms, we can start taking a look at our agenda for today. There it is, up on the slide as you would normally see it. Okay, great, we're all back. So today we're actually gonna start our next unit where we're going to be learning about poetry and specifically how to read a poem. I think a lot of times people come into reading poetry with some misconceptions about what that looks like. Oftentimes people are concerned with finding the hidden or deeper meaning of a particular poem. And I'm hoping over the course of the next 2 weeks, I can show you one, that literally anybody can read a poem and you don't have to have any special or secret knowledge in order to do that. And two, reading a poem isn't necessarily like reading a book. It's not like reading an article. You know, learn things from reading books and reading articles, and you also learn things from reading poems, but a poem is a lot more similar to eating a really good meal or listening to a really beautiful piece of music. Thanks, Alex. Let me share the screen again, my bad. I'm still kind of new at this whole Zoom thing, so share screen. There we go. Okay, cool. I hope you can see it now. So like I was saying, reading a poem isn't like reading a book. It's something to be enjoyed and experienced. And I'm actually going to start with a poem that will tell you a little bit how to read a poem. Okay, here we go. This poem is called Introduction to Poetry, and it's by a famous poet named Billy Collins. I asked them to take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide, or press an ear against its hive. I say, drop a mouse into a poem and watch him probe his way out, or walk inside the poem's room and feel the walls for a light switch. I want them to water ski across the surface of a poem, waving at the author's name on the shore. But all they want to do is tie the poem to a chair with a rope and torture a confession out of it. They begin beating it with a hose to find out what it really means. Now that I've read that poem, I'm going to put you back in your breakout rooms, and I'd just like you to talk about your reaction to that poem. What do you think it means? What do you think it says about the way we should read a poem? So jump on over to those breakout rooms. as you're coming back into the main room with all of us. Oh, did I forget to unmute you all again? That's okay. Well, I'll do it better next time. So here's what's going to happen now, folks. We're going to focus on the first stanza of this poem, where we take a poem and hold it up to the light like a color slide. Here's what that looks like. So when you're holding a poem up to the light like a color slide, as you're reading it, you might think to yourself, what do you see? What do you hear or smell or taste or touch when you read the poem all the way through? And then once you've got that image in your head, and remember, an image can be something you see or hear, any sort of sensory feeling you get. What does that image remind you of? How does it make you feel? And then how does this feeling fit into your experience of the poem as a whole? So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to read you a poem, and I'm actually going to just read it to you, and I'm not going to show you the text of the poem yet. What I'd like you to do is, wherever you are, this works best if you can close your eyes for a second and just listen. And as I'm reading, I want you to imagine that you're watching this poem like a movie. Imagine that you're seeing it as I'm reading it to you. This is one of my favorite poems. It's called Scheherazade by a poet named Richard Siken. So again, close your eyes, just listen, and see what images come into your mind, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you feel. Scheherazade. Tell me about the dream where we pull the bodies out of the lake and dress them in warm clothes again. How it was late and no one could sleep. The horses running until they forget that they are horses. It's not like a tree where the roots have to end somewhere. It's more like a song on a policeman's radio. How we rolled up the carpet so we could dance, and the days were bright red. And every time we kissed, there was another apple to slice into pieces. Look at the light through the window pane. That means it's noon. That means we're inconsolable. Tell me how all this, and love too, will ruin us. These are bodies possessed by light. Tell me we'll never get used to it. Okay, I'm going to now unmute you all and put you back in your breakout rooms. And what I want you to do when you're there is talk about what you saw, what you heard, what you felt, what you smelled, what you tasted as I read this poem aloud. Here we go.
Bruh.
Okay, folks, as you're returning from your breakout rooms, you should be able to see on your screen now the text of the poem that I sent out. Um, Also, the PDF file is available in the chat, so you can look at it there. Once everybody's returned from their breakout rooms, I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience of the poem and tell you some of the things that I see and the ways they make me feel. And then you're going to practice what we've just done, holding a poem up to the light with a different poem that I'll be sending out shortly. So that's what we'll get started on in just a couple of seconds. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and tell you all a little bit about my experience of this poem, what images I see, and what that makes me feel, and how I think that contributes to sort of the story of the poem. The first image that really grabs me in this poem is where in the first line it says, "We pull the bodies out of the lake." That initially seems like a very sort of frightening image. It almost makes me think of like a TV show where there might have been a series of murders. And then this odd thing happens. It says to dress them in warm clothes again. And the feeling that comes to mind there is almost the opposite of pulling the bodies out of the lake. You know, you've got these cold things coming out of the water. But to be dressed in warm clothes feels very comforting. And I'm imagining, you know, like a thick flannel shirt that's very soft and cozy and dry. Another image that really stands out to me is the part where it says, "The horses running until they forget that they are horses." It stands out to me because it's kind of confusing. Like, how could a horse run until it forgets that it's a horse? But I am picturing horses sort of running in a very free and maybe happy way. I'm also picturing the sound of a song on a policeman's radio, how it sort of sounds over the crackle of the radio that police might use, and normally where some very, I guess, sad or frightening or upsetting words might come across, you've got a song instead of that, which is an interesting juxtaposition. It's this pleasant melody versus the voice of someone delivering bad news. And then lots of positives, rolling up the carpet so we could dance. And then I noticed it says the days were bright red. I don't exactly know what that means, but in that same line it says every time we kissed there was another apple. And apples are often red. If we think about every time we kissed, lips are red. Just like so there's this whole theme of redness there. And it's all tied to some very positive things. The part where it says, "Look at the light through the window pane," really makes me think of sitting in my living room in the afternoon and watching the sun come in through the window. And you know how when the sun's coming directly through a window, sometimes you can see the dust in the air floating around. And that's sort of what it makes me think of. The second to last line, "These are bodies possessed by light." I almost imagine, you know, a light so bright that you can't even see the details of the person in front of it. You've just got, you can see the outline of the body with the light around it. So we've got a lot of really interesting images in this poem, and they create some very different feelings. We start with sort of like frightening images, the bodies in the lake, the policeman's radio. But then they transition into these very like pleasant, comforting, positive images. It kind of is making me think about how, you know, our lives are made up of times of sadness and coldness, and there are other times in our lives that are full of happiness and warmth. There are, you know, bad things that happen and good things that happen. There's love, there's hatred, and it seems like this poem is sort of putting all of these things together and just showing us, you know, one slice of what life can be. No one's life is all good and no one's life is all bad. Everyone has this range of experience. And the last line, "Tell me we'll never get used to it." What does it mean to be used to life? Does it mean to be bored with it or tired of it? maybe what this poem's showing us is a way to look at our lives and see everything that's there. Not just the good, not just the bad, not just the exciting or the boring, but to see the full range of it and to be able to appreciate all of it together. And to never feel like when we look back at the picture of our lives and we look forward to think of what's coming our way, that we can expect what's going to happen, or that it will or will not be different from the way things were before, but that it's always sort of an adventure. We never know exactly what's coming. It could be good, it could be bad, but ultimately it's the experience of our lives. And that in and of itself is kind of a good thing. And so that's sort of my experience of this poem. I'm going to send you back to your breakout rooms briefly to just talk about what I said and see if it compares with what reactions you were having when you read this poem. And then we'll do a little work with a poem, a different poem. So I'm going to unmute you all and send you back to your breakout rooms. Here we go. Okay, folks, as we return from our breakout rooms, you can see the slide. I'm going to send out a PDF in just a second, and it will contain a bunch of different poems. All I want you to do is choose one, and then I'll give you a couple minutes to read it to yourself and think about these questions. And then once you've thought about those questions, you're going to read the poem to your breakout room, and you will talk about those reactions. So we'll get started on that in just a couple of seconds. You should see the file coming through in the chat in about the next 10 seconds or so. Okay, folks. So I just sent a file to everyone. And this file contains a bunch of different poems. These are poems that I've selected specifically because they're really good for holding up to the light and seeing the different images, whether it's sight or hearing or smell or taste or touch. So what I'd like you to do right now is just choose one for yourself and read it to yourself. And let me send it again because it looks like some people didn't receive it. Let me try again. But once you've got it, choose a poem for yourself, read it to yourself, and think about those questions that I have posted on that slide. And then in a couple minutes, we'll go back to our breakout rooms and share those poems with each other. If you didn't get the file, first of all, check the chat. And then would you please send me a chat so that I can try to send it again. Okay, so it's seeming like a bunch of people didn't get it, which makes me think that it might not be working. In that case, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap up this session in just a couple of minutes. I will send it out via Google Classroom so that everybody can have access to it. And then we'll start our next live session tomorrow, sharing your experience of the poem. Thank you all for coming to our first live session. Obviously, I'm still getting a sense of like how things work, so it's a little, there are some issues here and there with making sure that everything's working properly, and I'm hoping our next one goes even smoother. If you have any feedback for me on this, you can send it to me via email. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If there's anything I can do to make this a better experience for you, I'll do my best to do that. But that is all I've got for today. I'll send out those poems via Google Classroom so you can read them and think about those questions. And then we'll start our next session tomorrow with the same thing. So we'll same time, same place, 11 a.m. this Zoom chat. So thanks for coming and email me with feedback. And it was great to talk to everybody. See you later.